Today is a pretty neat lesson because it expanding on that idea of economics and multiple cause and effects. Unit 4, lesson 2. And so today's lesson, by the time we complete this one, you will be able to identify multiple causes and effects and form a better understanding of the complex factors that affect the economy. So this is something that, we're all involved in, right? We're all consumers, we're all part of the economy. And it's really, it's relevant today because of, the issues we're having with the economy and certain things. So this, helps provide some understandings of how that all works. So let's listen in to our audio here.
Not every cause and effect relationship is simple. Many causes can contribute to a single result, and a single event or situation may result in multiple effects. Knowing how to identify multiple causes and effects will help you form a better understanding of economics and the complex factors that affect the economy. As with other areas of the GED test, questions about multiple causes and effects will test your ability to interpret information at various depth of knowledge levels through the use of complex reading skills and thinking skills.
Yeah, and so we've dealt with cause and effect throughout the courses so far. We've talked about language arts, we talked about it here. But it's rarely that things are so simple that there's only one cause that leads to one effect. And that could, a lot of everything. I mean, you think about your health, and like certain diseases and stuff, diabetes and heart disease. You might have a family history. So, your genetics might be a part of it. Definitely your diet is a part of it and your activity level. So if you can, improve your, level of activity and your diet, it helps prevent those diseases. It's usually not just one factor. And when it comes to things like the economy, we're always blaming the president. Time and time again, I look on Facebook and somebody's talking about the price of gas and, how this is Joe Biden's fault somehow. And I'll tell you right now, he has very little to do with the price of gas. Maybe, overarching, there's some ideas there, but we're always blaming the president for economic situations. Just remember, during the Obama administration, it just became a joke. You blamed everything on Obama. You go outside and you have a flat tire. You said, thanks, Obama. And even he got in on it. He even joked about it. So, but it's so much more complicated than that. It's so much more that, especially with economics, but, in politics and everything, that happens to either, make the economy good and have it get better, or and vice versa, and things with prices, what we're seeing with inflation today. There's multiple reasons for things not being available, or the prices are getting really high. And this is really going to talk a lot about that kind of idea. So let's take a look here. What we have to start with is talking about inflation rates over a few years. So two important areas of the study of macroeconomics are inflation and deflation. Inflation is when the supply of money exceeds the goods and services available. Okay, inflation occurs when the supply of money exceeds the goods and services available. This causes the value of the money to fall and prices to rise, right? So that's kind of what we're experiencing right now, right? That your dollar doesn't go as far when it's buying goods and services. This in turn discourages people from making purchases, right? Things are expensive. Inflation's effects are felt in all sectors of the economy and all segments of society. Deflation occurs when prices fall and the value of money rises. Negative inflation is the same as deflation. Okay, so you might hear those terms. You might hear deflation or negative inflation. So that's when your buying power of your dollar rises and the price of goods are falling. And inflation and the economic instability its bonds have been known to cause wars, problems in the food supply, and political unrest. So developing nations are in the most danger from inflation. So, what we used to call like third world countries, to some degree, developing nations that, have more issues with poverty will see those effects more. So the text here, text box A says inflation causes a chain reaction of events such as rising prices and fewer purchases. And then secondly, inflation is the cause wars, problems with food supply, political unrest, right? I mean, when people can't buy things, when people don't have access to goods, you have that political unrest. You have people that get frustrated. Bad economics or economic times will lead to war. It was a big part of how Hitler came to power. We talked about this a while back with the economic troubles that Germany had after World War One, and their inflation has not been matched, I think, in anywhere in modern history. They were literally printing $1 million Deutschmarks. That's how outrageous their inflation was. So just that was a recipe for somebody to come in, this charismatic individual, to say that he's going to fix everything. And in on our side of the world, after the Great Depression, we had FDR, or he was elected. So fortunately, we didn't have the type of issues that Germany had, but that often leads to some type of change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, during these sort of times of economic strife. So looking at our graph then, and we see US inflation rates by month and year. So we have 3 years we're looking at: 2010 in blue, 2011 in green, and 2012 in yellow beige color. At least this time they're very distinct and we can tell them apart really easily. And on our y-axis going up and down, that annualized rate of inflation, right, by percent. So each month there shows a different rate of inflation. And we see that 2011 really stands far above the rest of those years. Certain times, 2012 was a little worse than 2010. So we'll talk a little bit about that and answer some questions. So let's take a look. Oh, we've got some more audio. So let's listen to our audio here.
This question asks, based on the information, which of the following needs to exist for the law of supply and demand to function freely? Option A, competition. Option B, government regulation of prices. Option C, inflation. Option D, a growing economy. The passage states that, according to the economic laws of supply and demand, people will pay more for something they want when less of it is available. Alternatively, if there is more of a supply of a good or service than people demand, the supplier will lower the price to coax people into buying more of it. Based on this information, you can conclude that supply and demand require competition to function freely because competition helps regulate prices and the supply of goods. Supply and demand can cause fluctuation in prices, so option B is not correct. Inflation can affect supply and demand, but it is not necessary for it to function, so option C is not correct. While a growing economy may affect supply and demand, it is not a requirement. People will still need to purchase items regardless of the state of the economy. The correct answer to this question is option A.
Yeah, so that helps with setting prices, right? We talked about that, competition, and this supply and demand is largely responsible for the price of anything. And I mentioned gas yesterday, right? So back at the beginning of the pandemic, when everything started to shut down in 2020, right? That was around March. Sometime March, April, I forget when. It was after we were all, kind of shut inside, and basically, you're only supposed to be going to the store and stuff. And we were still living in Athens, and I went to Kroger to get groceries and get some gas. And I had a nice little, fuel points discount, but I paid 59 cents per gallon for my gas that day. And, I think it was probably like $1.29 or something, without my discount, but that was still, ridiculous compared to what we pay today. And the sole the overwhelming reason for that was because nobody was using gas, right? There wasn't anywhere to go. Everything was shut down. So the only thing that was really on the road were, grocery trucks, right? Delivery trucks, tractor trailers and stuff. There wasn't anywhere, most businesses were shut down. People weren't going out to eat. So the demand for gasoline dropped, right? Shoot, way, way, way down. So, and the response, that means the price, right? That's supply and demand. It got really cheap there for a little bit. Now we see higher prices, right? Now, that is a result of increased demand. A lot of that has to do with increased demand. Once things started opening back up, the economy started improving. Usually when you see higher gas prices, that means an economy is more active, right? And because demand had dropped, there wasn't as much production. So when we started getting back on our feet and everybody started getting back out again and using more gas, production was lagging behind. So supply was limited, and that made the price rise. And then, of course, what we talked about, competition. I can go to a Shell station, and it's going to be, I haven't looked at the gas prices here lately. I'm going to say it's like $3.15, whatever it is today. If I go to the Safeway, it's going to be $3.14 or $3.15. Because of that competition, they know they can't charge way above that because nobody's going to stop at the Safeway for an $8 gallon of gas if it's $3.15 at the Shell station down the road. And the same thing, you have to charge, you can't drop the price so low that you're not recovering, that you're going into the hole, right? That you're losing money to sell gas, unless it's like a one-day promotion or something like that. But they can't drop it to 80 cents a gallon because they're paying, however much for that fuel to sell it. So, that's basically supply and demand and how competition works within that. And of course, gas is always one that's on people's minds for some reason. So that's a good example to use. All right, so let's go over to the quiz. It's short today. We only got 4 questions on the quiz and 6 questions on the workbook. And how about, okay, so we're making assumptions. So you might assume that having more money than can be spent is good for an economy. The information on this page explains why this is not true, right? So that's what we talked about. That means that if you have all that cash, that typically means that inflation has occurred. If you have this high amount of money, and it's just not going as far when it comes to spending power. So question 1, Etta, would you mind reading question 1 for us?
Okay. It says, which of the following was most likely to be true in mid to late 2011? A, higher prices reduce consumer spending and increase value of money. B, higher prices reduce consumer spending and political unrest. C, increased demand for goods, higher prices and political unrest. Or D, reduced consumer spending, deflation and political unrest. Okay, so 2011 is the green one. Is it B?
Yeah, B, right? That's what it said there at the end. I'm surprised they didn't have that text again. They usually have that, text above the passage above, but they only had the graph this time. Yeah, they mentioned, higher prices, right? Inflation, you get higher prices, reduced consumer spending. Nobody wants to spend their money because they're not getting, as much. And then of course the frustration, the lack of buying power, maybe you're missing out on things that you need, tends to result in political unrest. I think 2011 is when, thanks Obama, became really popular. So, and again, we look at our political leaders and we put a lot of blame on it for them. Sometimes they're responsible for it, other times not so much. That's what makes this, these ideas about economics really complex. So yeah, number three, number one is B. I'm getting way ahead of myself. Okay. And yeah, so we're going to have a drag and drop, and we'll go ahead and show you here. We're going to fill this out here, equilibrium point on prices. So more about supply and demand. How about Grace? Would you mind reading our passage there?
Okay. Read the direction and the passage on supply and demand below. Then read the drag and drop question and complete the diagram by placing the drag and drop option into the appropriate box. The cause and effect relationship between supply and demand is a strong determining factor of prices. According to the economic laws of supply and demand, people will pay more for something they want when less of it is available. Alternatively, if there is more of supply of a good or service than people demand, the supplier will lower the price to coerce people into buying more of it. The point at which the supply of an item is set in response to an equality of supply and demand is called the equilibrium point. At price above the equilibrium point, demand drops. If the price becomes too high, demand may disappear completely. However, if the price becomes too low, the seller will be unable to make a profit and will stop producing the item. Supply and demand are themselves the effects of other causes. For example, the effect of inflation can decrease demand and force down an item's price. Inflation can also raise the cost of producing an item, resulting in a higher price, which can also lead to a decrease in demand.
All right. So let's take a look here. Where are we putting these boxes? Where does demand go down? Where are we going to put this one?
Oh, the third one.
So it's at the top. This is kind of confusing. Yeah, this one's not real straightforward. So demand goes down.
Oh, goes down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then
and
supply goes up.
Supply goes up.
Yeah.
Right. So that's on that higher end, right? As demand goes down, supply goes up. So down here, supply goes down. Demand goes up. It's a lot easier. It's hard to kind of see it, but once or work through it, but once you see it, it makes more sense. So that equilibrium point, right? When you have a steady supply and it's affordable, right? You see what happens there. But supply goes, towards demand goes up, supply goes down. On the top, supply goes up, demand goes down, right? Think about, I don't know, what was something popular a few years ago that's not popular? Fidget spinners, right? Every kid had a fidget spinner. I don't know, was that 3 or 4 years ago, something like that? Hot item. Now, I mean, those were cheap. I don't know how much they were, $5, $6, something like that. Nobody's making fidget spinners today, right? There's no demand for them now. No, nobody is. I mean, I'm sure some kids are still carrying around, but the demand for that item has gone down so low, nobody's really making them anymore. Somebody out there has probably got a whole, warehouse full of them. So, and of course, you'll find them in a bargain bin. You go, to the dollar store or something, they're probably like in a bargain bin, marked down. That's where, marked down items come from, right? Stuff that's just not popular anymore, or maybe never was popular. And that gets thrown in the bargain bin. They get marked down, just trying to recoup as much as you can off of something. They may even be taking a loss, but they're just trying to get rid of it. Same thing with like, maybe right now it's not a good, this isn't a good example because of supply and demand, but if you think about automobiles. So, right, they usually have those big sales. I think it's like usually during the summer when they're trying to get all of those, this year's models off the lot so they can start getting next year's models in, right? So those prices go way down. Toilet paper. Yes. Yeah. So, right. That's a good one. That's a good one, Fatia. Stuff like that. Right now we're having an issue with semiconductors, right? So anything that uses a microchip, your TV, game consoles, right? PlayStation 5. I'm surprised people haven't been murdered over PlayStation 5s because they're so limited as far as production. Cars use a bunch of microchips now that has limited production. So as a result, if you have a used automobile that you need to get rid of, now's the time to sell it because they are, really scarce, and it's driven up the price of used automobiles. You could go in, and even if you wanted to trade one in, which is never recommended, because you always get more selling your car straight out than trading one into a dealership, but that's driven up the price, right? Some of that has to do with COVID too, because in the midst of COVID, when everybody was locked at home, they were all buying new TVs and Nintendo Switches and, just stuff like that. And that semiconductor, supply went really far down. And that drove up prices too. So yeah, I mean, this lesson is great because it's something that we are smack dab in the middle of, and we can all understand. We all understand supply and demand right now. And yeah, I mean, they got to the point where they're rationing toilet paper, right? You can only get like, one pack, and stuff like that at the grocery store. So, yep, fun times. All right. And then number 3, we have a new section on supply and demand. Tracy, would you mind reading number 3 for us?
Yes. Number 3. The cause and effect relationship between supply and demand is a strong determining factor of prices. According to the economic laws of supply and demand, people will pay more for something they want when less of it is available. Alternatively, if there is more of a supply of the good or service than people demand, the supplier will lower the price to coax people into buying more of it. The point at which the supply of an item is set in response to an equality of supply and demand is called the equilibrium point. As price above the equilibrium point, demand drops. If the price becomes too high, demand may disappear completely. However, if the price becomes too low, the seller will be unable to make a profit and will stop producing the item. Supply and demand are themselves the effects of other causes. For example, the effects of inflation can decrease demand and force down an item's price. Inflation can also raise the cost of producing an item, resulting in a higher price, which can also lead to the decrease in demand. Supply and demand. The question, which of the following statement is true? Supply, demand, and inflation. A, each basic cost of economic activity. B, do not influence the economy. C, operate independently of one another. D, are each influenced by many causes. D.
D, yeah, just like we've been talking about, right? And we're living in a time right now where we see the many causes that are affecting things, just like the price of gas. 2 years ago, price of gas dropped. Why? Because of COVID. Well, why did it drop because of COVID? Because nobody was using gasoline. So, it's lots of things going on and happening to even with simple supply and demand. Like, we know how supply and demand works, right? We're sitting here talking about it. As supply decreases or demand goes up and supply decreases, right? So do prices. But lots of things are involved behind the scenes that are making that happen. So D for number 3. And then same passage. So how about Sasha Gay? Finish out our quiz for us, number 4.
Based on the information, which of the following needs to exist for the law of supply and demand to function freely? A, competition. B, government regulation of prices. C, inflation. D, growing economy. A.
Yeah, I think we got this answer earlier, didn't we? A, competition, right? So that's part of that law of supply and demand. We talked about monopolies, right? If you you're producing a good that no one else produces, then you alone are responsible for that supply, and you're setting the price alone. There's no competition there. And we talked about the government tries to avoid that, so we don't have a product or a good that one company is going to dictate to the world or the country how much they're going to pay for that. We like competition. So 1 was B as in boy. 2, we had demand goes down, supply goes up. Supply goes down, demand goes up for number 2. And the point there is, right, that's how the prices work. So as demand goes up, supply goes down, the price goes up. And then when demand goes down and supply goes up, the price goes down. And 3 was D as in dog. And 4 was A. All right. So let's go on over to the workbook. Only 6 questions for the workbook here. And as we're studying here, it says some cause and effect relationships can be complex. These may involve multiple causes, multiple effects, or both. Learning to identify and analyze multiple causes and effects will increase your ability to understand and interpret complicated concepts. Most events have more than one cause or effect. We've been talking a lot about sort of those simple, cause A or effect B was caused by A, just those simple, linear ones. But for example, here, the drop in home prices in late 2008 had many causes and effects. The value of real estate dropped. Talked about this a little bit. People with adjustable rate mortgages could no longer afford their homes, and foreclosures increased. All of this caused job losses in the real estate and construction fields, and those people became in danger of losing their homes. And that cascades further, right? If you have a sector like that, so real estate, and that also affected banking, and that affects construction, and that goes into other, Home Depot and Lowe's takes a hit because people aren't, buying building materials as much. And then those people maybe get laid off because there's not as much demand. So they don't need as many people working. So you see how those just, continue to snowball and create issues. So let's start the workbook here. Holiday shopping. Just got through our holiday shopping here. Holiday shopping is often a good indicator of the health of the economy. They, always at the end of the year, they start talking about how much people are spending for Christmas. So in years when people are planning to spend more on their holiday shopping, one can assume that the economy is in a better place than in years when people are cutting back. The graph shows the results of a survey in which people were asked whether they were going to spend more, less, or the same amount on their holiday shopping as they did the previous year. Note, some years are missing in the graph. So they're basically looking at the squares there indicate the years that they've studied, that they survey people. So 2003, 2004, 2007, 2010, and 2011. And so in blue was people spending more. In yellow, the people spending less. And in green, the people that were spending the same amount. And we could see the percentage changing there as we go along in between those three different choices that the people were making. So the text A says, to successfully answer the questions, analyze the information and graph to find patterns in holiday spending. Also think about maybe what we've talked about as far as economic uptick or decline and how that may be relevant to those years we're looking at here. Then examine the graph for indications of major changes in holiday spending. This alerts you to a shift in the economy, right? When you see trends like that, why are people, spending less in 2010, 2011, right? They were spending a little more, right? That number went down, and people spending the same amount stayed this, or actually went up. So let's take a look here. So using logic. Use logic to determine whether an event has multiple causes, multiple effects, or both. Carefully consider each cause and effect, what caused each situation, and what happened as a result. Christiana, would you mind reading question 1 for us?
Question 1. According to the graph, in which of the following years were adults more and least optimistic? Respectively. Adults more.
So we'll look at the graph here. Okay, so respectively means, which one, so most and least respectively. So being first, least being. So which year do we see on the graph, do you think that people were most about the economy? Where we're saying, I feel safe spending a little more or the same in the current economic situation. What year looks best there?
So the more is 2007.
So 2004, if you look there, right? So the people spending the same amount went up. So they felt safe that they could spend the same amount. Now, if you look, the people that were spending more, it doesn't really change all that much. But you also see in 2004, the people that spent less went down. So instead of deciding, I'm going to spend less, that number went down. We had less people saying that they were going to spend less, and we had more people saying that they were going to spend the same. So that indicates some optimism, right? And then secondly, 2011, we see more people deciding to spend less. So in that year, right, that, they're like, things look a little iffy. I think I'm going to cut back on what I'm spending on my kids this year for Christmas, right? And we also see a little downturn for the people who are going to spend more. And we also see that downturn where less people were spending the same amount. So more people spend less, right? That's a little weird kind of graph to look at for that information. But yes. One is C then. 2004 was a good year. It was optimistic. 2011, not so much. Okay, and then we got holiday shopping again. Tracy, would you like to read number 2 for us?
Yes, number 2. Based on the graph, in which year can you assume that the economy was weakest? A, 2005, B, 2004, C, 2008, D, 2006. Wicked. 2004, 2010. I don't know.
Yeah,
A,
to sort of use the lines in between. So if it doesn't appear, so we could say that's around 2005, in between 2007, 2010 would be
2005. 2005. I think 2005.
So it's
2000.
2008 is actually the weakest here. So C, and if we look right here, right around where that B is, and that's actually showing, it's like we're seeing the downturn. We're seeing the same amount spent dropping pretty drastically, and that yellow line going up where people are going to spend less coming up. And you can also see in a blue a little bit of a different, a downturn. And of course, 2008 was when we really got slammed with that Great Recession. And again, talking about sort of the issues with the real estate market and everything that really drove that. So C for number 2, right? Really seeing those 2 lines. That's what you're looking for, is those shifts between those 2. And then we have crop prices. Etta, you want to read our passage here on crops, supply and demand?
Okay. In the United States, prices are set by the economic concept of supply and demand. When a product's supply is higher than its demand, the result is a surplus. When demand is higher than supply, the result is shortage. Surpluses and shortages help determine prices. For example, a surplus of corn may result in lower prices to help encourage sales. When a shortage occurs, sellers raise prices because people are willing to pay more for the good or product. Corn prices rose in 2007, increased sales of corn to overseas nations, combined with a 30% increase in the amount of corn used to produce the fuel called ethanol, resulted in a national shortage and a higher price per bushel. Higher corn prices also resulted in higher prices for foods that use corn as an ingredient. A third effect grew from farmers using more of their land to grow corn. This meant that fewer acres were devoted to crops such as wheat and soybeans. The dip in wheat and soybean production led prices for those crops to rise also.
Yeah, and there's our graph, right? So showing soybeans in blue, wheat in green, and corn in yellow. So dollars per bushel on our y-axis, so from $0 to $10 per bushel, and then per year. So we see, this real increase in prices around 2007 or so for soybean and wheat, and corn was sort of creeping up there into 2009 before it sort of leveled off again 2010 to 2013. So thinking about how these things work together, right, in agriculture. So products like wheat, soybean, and corn. How will one affect the other? Let's look at our drag and drop boxes here. So increased sale of corn, increased amount of corn used for ethanol, right? That was a big deal, a decade ago or so, making ethanol. So an increase of corn, sale of corn because of its use in ethanol. So what is that going to cause?
Higher food prices or a corn shortage.
Yeah, corn shortage, right? So that's first. And then we get to a higher corn price, right? So the price of corn goes up. And now, because the price of corn goes up, how's that going to affect, the consumer?
The higher food prices for foods with corn.
Yep, higher food prices for foods with corn. And we use corn in a lot of stuff too. So, okay, so higher food prices for corn. All right, so then more land, right? So now we want to increase production of corn because the demand's higher. We're getting some more money out of it. So now more land used for corn. So what's that gonna do?
Less land used for wheat and soybeans.
Right. You only have so much land to grow any one of those items. So you're going to have to pick and choose if you're a farmer, right? So if you're, happen to, maybe be on a large corporate farm or something like that, then you have to decide what land you're using for what. So then less land used for wheat and soybeans. Well, what's going to happen then? Higher price for wheat and soybeans, right? So that's this multiple cause and effect, right? Everything's connected, especially when you're talking about an individual sector, of the economy. One thing is going to affect another. So we submit that just to review there, right? So increased sale of corn due to, for one reason, the increased amount of corn used for ethanol. That leads to a corn shortage. That leads to the demand going up and the price going up. So higher price of corn, higher food prices for the consumer then because the demand of corn went up. And then you need more land used for corn, less land used for other products. Then what's going to happen to those products? Well, eventually, when the demand goes up for those products, the price of wheat and soybean products will also go up, and that'll get passed on to the consumer as well. So all related. Now we got more drag and drop. I think the rest of these are drag and drop for the last three here. Grace, would you mind reading our section talking about gas prices here?
Okay. Supply and demand are major factors in the rise and fall of gasoline prices. Shortage and fears of such shortages can cause these prices to fluctuate in a short period of time. As developing countries grow more industrialization, global demand for gasoline increases. From the beginning of 2005 through the middle of 2008, overall prices of gasoline in the United States rose steadily. In 2005, the average price of a gallon of gas in the United States was $1.78. By the middle of 2008, the price had reached the national average of nearly $4 per gallon. By the end of 2008, however, reduced demand sent prices back down to around $1.60 per gallon. These changes occurred because of increases and decreases in crude oil prices. From 2005 to May 2008, the price per barrel of crude oil rose from $42 to more than $100 per barrel. By the end of 2008, the price fell to less than $50 per barrel. In addition to free market effects, the number of other factors can and do play a role in gasoline prices. Developments in world politics sometimes disturb market forces. Oil prices are also subject to manipulation. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, accounts for 40% of the world's crude oil production. This group routinely limits the amount of oil its members export. This results in higher gasoline and oil prices worldwide.
All right. Yeah, and oil is such a finicky commodity because there are so many crises that happen around the world that can affect the price of gas at any time. One of the worst energy crisis in 1979 when Carter was president was one of the reasons he probably didn't get reelected, because it happened towards the end of his presidency, and it hit a lot of Americans, but people were literally lining up at the pump, like miles deep to get gas because of concerns of the oil shortage, which was sparked by the Iranian Revolution of 79. And those Middle Eastern countries, a lot of them are big time oil producers. So that upset in production, which OPEC is a part of, right, because they tend to set prices and the amount of production, they will regulate how much oil is let into the market. So demand, of course, was high in the U.S. and supply was low, and it caused prices to shoot up. Again, it's just like this. Same kind of thing. Not nearly as bad as it was in 79, but again, we see that change in the price of gasoline. Last year, there was that issue in Texas where there was the ice storm, and we have a lot of our petroleum processing plants in Texas, as well as oil pumping going on through Texas, and that caused a hiccup in prices. So let's look here. So what is the first thing? We see the average price for gas in the United States between 2007 and 2012. We see it going up, and then we see it taking a big dive there between June and September 2008. Continues to go down December, starts to climb back up, and is up back to where it was near $4 per gallon around March 2011. So what happens first? What's going on here to cause that decline in demand, right?
Demand, yeah.
Yeah, so nobody needs it. We're having an economic issue. There was all kinds of craziness going on at that time, to summer 2008. So not as much was necessary. Price goes down, declining demand. So as a result, what do we have here at the bottom?
Low crude oil prices.
There you go, right? So that's following on. Then we have low crude oil prices there for the remainder of George W. Bush's 2008. So the election would have been right around here, and then Obama takes office, and we can then thank Obama, right, for the rising oil prices, because it was obviously all his fault. So, right, and that leaves limited exports of oil, right? And this is, a continuous cycle. This happens over and over again. Just depends on so many factors, world turmoil, the weather, just everything, affects that, not just a policy of one particular president. Although, if it comes to things like war, that can certainly affect, prices on fuel and the crude oil price and everything else. Or they talk about things like pipelines. So access, that can also affect it as well, but there's still supply out there, even regardless of how it's being transported. And that was 4 and 5. So I'll go ahead and read 5 here. So another drag and drop. It's a small one. So let's take a look here. So it says the graph below shows new U.S. housing starts between 2005 and 2012. Housing starts are the number of new homes being built nationally. Number is considered a leading economic indicator. Right? We talked about economic indicators. Here's a good one. Beginning in 2006, U.S. housing starts began to decline. In addition, many people who had borrowed money to pay for their homes could no longer make their loan payments. Lenders took possession of the homes, resulting in an increase in empty houses for sale. So if we look here, drag and drop the causes and effects into the correct places in the diagram. So we'll look here, causes and effects. Our graph, right? Housing starts. So our y-axis shows annual, I'm going to turn my head here and look, annual rates in millions of units, seasonally adjusted. So annual rate, millions of units. So when it says 2, that's 2 million new housing starts in the year 2005. 2 million new housing starts in the United States in 2005. Then we see that slowly, well, not even slowly dropping, rapidly dropping until where it hits rock bottom around 2009, where we have maybe 500, yeah, about 500,000, 600,000 maybe, because that's 0.5. So around 600,000 new housing starts. And then slowly, by the time we get to 2012, about almost back up to 1 million. So looking at our drag and drop box, our first cause is already in here, right? Decrease in housing starts. So what's going to be the effect of a decrease in housing starts?
Decrease in construction and carpentry industry jobs.
There you go, right? So you're going to have layoffs, right? You're going to have, contractors not working. They're going to cut back on employment. And of course, also, they're not buying, goods for construction. They don't need materials. So that affects, places like I said, Lowe's and Home Depot and 84 Lumber and all these people that carry those types of construction materials. So a cause then is what?
Increase in housing starts.
Yeah. And then of course that leads increase in construction and carpentry. So those are all related, right? Decrease in housing, less construction. Increase in housing, more construction, more jobs. So we'll submit that there. All right. And this is the last one. I'll go ahead and read through here. This is more about the housing industry. So in many cases, the problems were caused by the type of loans taken out by homeowners or home buyers. Remember, I mentioned this yesterday. These adjustable rate loans offered affordable payments in the beginning, but the amount owed each month was connected to general economic conditions, right? Adjustable rate, the rate that you, or the amount you owed every month could change. As economic expansion slowed, home payments grew higher. Many home buyers could no longer afford them. Lenders foreclosed on many loans, taking ownership of the houses. So we talk about, that was the era of the subprime loan. So that is a loan that you get when, you don't have a great credit score, your FICO score is low, and people are, there's a high risk there that those type of loans do not get repaid, subprime loans. So the interest rates are really crazy. They'll have variable, or they'll have adjustable rates, and they're just not good loans. You hope to get a good credit score so you get a decent interest rate and everything. And sure enough, now in this case, subprime loans made up about 20% of total home loans in the United States. 90% of that 20%, if you can follow along here, were adjustable rate loans. So close to 20, that probably is around 15% or so of the loans in the United States at that time were these adjustable rate loans. Well, as economic conditions aren't great, those loan payments change, right? There's more risk involved with them, so they'll go up. And on top of, maybe these people were losing their jobs because, the economy was bad, or the rates were getting so bad that they couldn't make those loan payments anymore. So just a huge, huge issue with housing and these loans, people foreclosing on their loans, banks not getting their money, houses sitting empty. And And on the flip side, I mentioned the movie The Big Short. A bunch of people got rich off of that, betting basically against these loans, which was all legal. Like there's some dudes out there that got rich off of those loans. But yeah, that's a different story. Anyways, what we're talking about here is those failures. A lot of that was due to adjustable rate mortgages, poor economic conditions, and sort of irresponsibility on the part of the home buyers as well. They can't, we have to give them some blame as well for getting loans that they couldn't afford. So if we're looking then, 2 boxes here. So the increase in foreclosures, we have 4 options here. What caused those foreclosures between 2007 and 2010? What were the 2 primary reasons?
Poor economic conditions.
Poor economic conditions, absolutely. What was the other one?
Adjustable rate mortgages.
Adjustable rate mortgages, right? Those are the 2 things really just crushed the real estate industry in those years, and was a big factor, was a large part of the Great Recession in that time frame. So number 6, and that is it. That is social studies for today. Anybody need to follow up on any of the questions? All 6 of them today. We all
I
good?
missed number 1 and I missed number 1.
Number 1, Tracy, was C as in cat.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Sounds like we're good then on those. So, it's a complex idea,